That night was rainy, an unusual rain the kingdom was unfamiliar with. It came without warning, heavy and relentless, drumming against rooftops and stone paths as though the sky itself had been stirred into unrest. Thunder followed in sharp, echoing cracks that made doors tremble and lamps flicker. Those still awake paused in fear, wondering what such a night might be announcing. Under that downpour, a lone figure crossed the palace grounds. Healer Ravion walked with hurried, uneven steps, his robe clinging to him, soaked through and darkened by rain. His hair was plastered to his face, his shoulders bowed from exhaustion rather than age. Yet, despite the storm beating against him, he cradled something carefully in both arms, something wrapped in a white cloth. The cloth glimmered faintly, catching what little light the night offered, as though it held something precious that refused to be swallowed by darkness. As Ravion reached the entrance of the healer's quarters, another figure emerged from beneath the stone archway. "Heavens!" Thalos breathed, stepping forward. "Ravion, what happened to you?" Ravion did not answer immediately. His chest rose and fell as he struggled to catch his breath. Rainwater dripped steadily from his sleeves, pooling at his feet. Thalos's eyes shifted from his condition to what he held so tightly. "What is that?" Thalos asked, lowering his voice. Ravion looked down at the bundle in his arms, his expression unreadable. "I found her," he said quietly. "Found who?" Thalos asked, lowering his voice. Ravion adjusted his grip and carefully loosened the cloth just enough for a small face to be seen. A child. No, an infant. Her skin was warm despite the cold rain. A soft golden glow seemed to linger about her, subtle but undeniable, as though the storm itself had spared her. She was asleep, her tiny fingers curled instinctively into the cloth that wrapped her. Thalos felt his breath catch. "At this hour? In this storm?" "At the palace border," Ravion replied. "Left alone. No mark of family. No sign of return." The thunder rolled again, louder this time, as though punctuating the words. They carried the child inside without further questions. Within the healer's quarters, lamps were lit and doors closed against the storm. Ravion laid the infant gently upon a table prepared with warm coverings. As Thalos dried his hands and leaned closer, he noticed something that made him pause. "She's not crying," he said softly. "Most children would be screaming by now." Ravion nodded. "She hasn't cried since I found her." The child stirred slightly, her lashes fluttering, then settled again into sleep. There was no fear in her expression, no distress, only a quiet stillness that felt out of place on such a night. They examined her for injuries and found none, no bruises, no marks of harm, only a faint birthmark near her shoulder, pale and indistinct, as though unfinished. "What do we do?" Thalos asked. Ravion straightened. "We do what healers do. We protect life." By dawn, word had spread quietly among the healers. A child had been found. No one knew from where, no one claimed her. And so, by palace custom, she was recorded as an orphan and placed under the care of the inner quarters. They named her Arana. Years passed. Arana grew within the palace walls, not as royalty, not as kin, but as someone tolerated by tradition and sustained by duty. She learned early the important values of life, and gratitude became her second nature, humility and shield. She assisted where she was told, learned what she could, spoke softly, worked diligently, and never once asked about her past. It was as though she had no memory of before the palace, only an instinct to endure. Yet, even as a child, there was something about her that drew the eye, not loudly, not intentionally, a calm presence, a gentleness that lingered longer than expected. Some said she carried herself as though she was listening to something no one else could hear. The healers noticed it first. "She's different," Thalos once murmured, watching her grind herbs with steady hands. not gifted in the usual ways, but balanced. Ravion only nodded. He had always known the night he found her was not ordinary. As Arana grew older, her beauty emerged naturally, unannounced and unadorned. She made no effort to display it, and seemed almost unaware of it herself. Still, whispers followed her in quiet corners of the palace, never loud enough for her to confront, never kind enough to ignore. And above all, no one spoke of the storm. The night of the rain was remembered only by the healers, locked away as an oddity, a mystery best left undisturbed. No prophecy was mentioned, no meaning assigned. Yet sometimes, when thunder rolled in the distance, Ravion would pause and look toward the palace border, as though the rain would reveal what it had once delivered. Arana remained unaware of it all, of how she arrived, of what the storm had carried with her, of the quiet shift her presence had already begun to make. For now, she was only a servant. And the kingdom slept, unaware that on a night of unfamiliar rain, something had crossed its borders that would one day change everything. Chapter 2. Arana grew within the palace without ceremony. Her days followed simple rhythms, rising early, working quietly, moving where she was told. The palace was vast, but her world within it was small and clearly defined. She learned quickly where she belonged, and more importantly, where she did not. The healers ensured she was useful. She learned enough to serve, reading basic notes, counting supplies, recognizing herbs. Nothing more was expected of her. No one spoke to her about ambition or future paths. The palace did not offer such things freely. As she grew older, her role settled without discussion. She became one of the servants. She cleaned, carried, assisted. She worked without complaint and rarely drew attention. Among the staff, she was known as reliable, quiet, efficient, forgettable. Overseers appreciated her for that. She blends in, they said. Arana made sure she did. Yet blending in did not always work. Without seeking it, she began to stand out, not loudly, not deliberately, but enough to be noticed. A calm presence, a softness that contrasted with the sharp edges of palace life. Some servants whispered, others watched her longer than they should. Arana responded by retreating further. She kept her gaze lowered, her hair tied tight, her movements careful. She spoke only when spoken to. If attention found her, she did not return it. She believed invisibility was safety, and for a time it was. The palace continued as it always had, structured, hierarchical, indifferent. Arana endured within it, unnoticed by most, unclaimed by anyone. She asked for nothing and was given little. What she did not know was that remaining quiet did not erase her presence. It only delayed its recognition. And while she believed herself safely hidden within the palace shadows, those shadows were already watching her more closely than she realized. Chapter 3. Luna Queen Bestibel noticed Arana without intending to. It was not the kind of noticing that came with alarm or anger. At first, it was little more than awareness, a servant moving through the hallways with unusual composure, a presence that seemed to soften a room without seeking attention. Bestibel dismissed it as nothing. The palace was full of servants. There was no reason one should stand out. Yet, over time, the awareness returned. Bestibel began to recognize Arana's quiet figure in places where attention naturally gathered, near the great hall, along the garden paths, at the edges of ceremonial gatherings where servants waited. She noticed how conversations sometimes faltered for a brief moment when Arana passed, how eyes lingered, then shifted away. It unsettled her. The queen had ruled the palace for many years, accustomed to the weight of being seen. She carried her title with practiced grace, her authority unquestioned. Every glance, every bow, every silence had once belonged solely to her. Now, something about this servant disturbed that balance. Bestabel told herself it was foolish. Arana was no threat, no lineage, no title, no ambition. And yet the feeling persisted, subtle and insistent. It was not envy of beauty alone, but of the ease with which it existed. Arana did not command attention, she did not demand it, it came anyway. That frightened her more than open rivalry ever could. Bestabel's thoughts often returned to her daughters. They were princesses of the kingdom, raised carefully, prepared for futures that would strengthen alliances and preserve the throne. They had been taught to walk with confidence, to speak with authority, to understand their place. And yet, she began to wonder, what if the world looked elsewhere? What if comparison, unspoken and unfair, took root in the minds of those who watched? The fear grew quietly, taking shape in moments Bestabel did not share with anyone. In the privacy of her chambers, she replayed small observations, convincing herself they carried greater meaning. A servant's gaze lingering too long, a guard turning his head, a whispered remark she could not fully hear. She never spoke Arana's name aloud at first, but silence did not ease her mind. It sharpened it. Bestabel began to watch more closely. She noted Arana's habits, her routes through the palace, the way she carried herself with humility that seemed almost deliberate. There was no arrogance in the girl, no challenge offered. That absence of challenge felt like a kind of power. It was then that Bestabel's fear began to change. What had started as unease became suspicion. What had been suspicion became resolve. If Arana could not be removed from sight, then she would be diminished within it. The queen convinced herself that this was necessary, not out of cruelty, but out of duty. The stability of the palace, the protection of her daughters, the preservation of order. She told herself she was acting as any ruler would. Outwardly, nothing changed. Bestabel remained composed, attentive, and regal. No decree was issued, no accusation made. The court saw only the Luna Queen they had always known. But beneath that calm surface, a decision had formed. Arana would be reminded of her place, and Bestabel, in convincing herself that she was guarding what mattered most, took her first step toward becoming something she did not yet recognize. Chapter 4. The change did not come all at once. At first, it was subtle. Small adjustments made quietly, without witnesses. Arana's duties were shifted without explanation. Tasks that once took place in open corridors were reassigned to secluded chambers. Errands were extended, routes altered, hours lengthened. Nothing that could be questioned on its own, nothing that invited attention. Arana accepted each change without complaint. She assumed she had erred somewhere, though she could not say how. She worked harder, moved faster, spoke less. If correction was required, she would meet it with obedience. That had always been enough before. It was no longer enough. The Luna Queen began to summon her privately, always when the palace was at its quietest. The chambers were vast and immaculate, filled with polished surfaces and controlled silence. In those rooms, Bestabel's voice was measured, her words carefully chosen. "You are forgetful," she would say. "You move too slowly. You seem to forget your place." Arana lowered her head each time, absorbing the words without response. Apologies came easily to her. She believed them necessary.
Soon, words gave way to intention. Mistakes were invented where none existed. Tasks were made impossible to complete within the time allowed. When Arana failed, she was reprimanded sharply, sometimes dismissed without permission to leave. At other times, her work was undone in front of her and ordered redone without explanation. The humiliation was precise, never loud. Other servants were not present. No witnesses lingered long enough to question what they saw. The queen's authority ensured silence. Those who noticed Arana's growing exhaustion chose to not ask. The palace had taught them when to look away. As weeks passed, the cruelty sharpened. Arana was struck for perceived disobedience, pushed aside for imagined insolence. The blows were never public, never severe enough to demand medical attention. They left marks only where clothing could conceal them, pain only she was expected to carry. Still, she did not resist. Resistance, she believed, would only worsen things. Endurance had always been her strength. She clung to it now, convincing herself that patience would eventually restore balance. What hurt most was not the physical pain, but the deliberate erasure. Bestabel spoke to her as though she were less than present, as though her worth had already been decided. She was compared unfavorably, diminished with precision, reminded repeatedly that she was nothing more than a servant who had forgotten herself. "You attract notice you have not earned," the queen once said quietly. "It would be wise to disappear." Arana nodded, though she did not understand how to make herself smaller than she already was. Through it all, the Alpha King remained unaware. In public spaces, Bestabel's demeanor never faltered. She remained gracious, attentive, the image of a devoted Luna queen. Arana was careful to mirror that illusion: steady hands, lowered eyes, silence where questions might have formed. She did not seek help. She did not speak of the bruises or the sleepless nights. To speak would require certainty, and certainty had never belonged to her. Instead, she learned to endure quietly. And behind closed doors, cruelty settled into routine, unseen, unquestioned, and growing bolder with every moment it remained hidden. Chapter 5. The day began like any other. The palace moved according to its usual rhythm. Guards changing shifts, servants attending their duties, courtiers passing through halls polished by years of repetition. Nothing in the air suggested that anything would break from routine. Arana had been summoned to one of the inner chambers shortly after midday. The message was brief, delivered without explanation. She went without hesitation, as she always did. Inside, the room was quiet, its tall windows drawn to soften the light. The Luna Queen stood near a table, her back turned. For a moment, there was only silence. "You are late," Bestabel said at last. Arana bowed her head. "Forgive me, my queen." The words were familiar. They offered no protection. The accusation that followed was sharp and sudden, a list of failures Arana did not recognize as her own. She listened, hands folded, shoulders lowered, prepared to accept whatever judgment came. It came without warning. Bestabel's hand struck her across the face, the sound breaking the stillness of the chamber. Arana staggered, barely keeping her balance. Before she could recover, she was shoved backward, forced to the floor. "You have grown careless," the queen said coldly, "and careless servants must be reminded." Arana did not cry out. She pressed her hands against the stone, her breath uneven but controlled. Pain was something she had learned to contain. What neither of them noticed was the sound of approaching footsteps. The Alpha King had been passing through the adjoining corridor, his route altered by a last-minute request from the council. The door to the chamber stood partially open. Voices carried where they were not meant to. He heard the strike before he saw it. "What is happening here?" he demanded, pushing the door open fully. The room froze. Vestibule turned sharply, her composure faltering for the first time. Arana remained on the floor, stunned by the sudden intrusion, her head still bowed. The Alpha King took in the scene in a single glance. The queen's raised hand, the servant at her feet, the tension heavy in the air. "Woman," he said sharply, stepping forward. "Stop." The word echoed, final and commanding. Vestibule lowered her hand slowly. "My king, this is a private matter," she began. "There is nothing private about cruelty," he replied. His attention shifted to Arana. "Stand up." She obeyed with effort, her movements unsteady. As she rose, the sleeve of her garment slipped, revealing bruises darkened by time. The Alpha King's expression changed. "How long?" he asked quietly. Arana said nothing, not from defiance, but from habit. Silence had kept her safe for so long that speech felt impossible. The Alpha King stepped closer. He noticed the marks more clearly now, the careful placement, the attempts to conceal. As she turned slightly, he caught sight of a faint birthmark near her shoulder, pale against her skin. Something stirred within him, sharp and unexpected. The moment stretched. The palace seemed to hold its breath. "This ends now," he said at last, his voice controlled but heavy with authority. "Leave us." Vestibule hesitated, then inclined her head stiffly and withdrew without another word. The Alpha King remained, his gaze fixed on Arana, not with judgment, but with concern that unsettled her more than anger ever had. "Go to the healers," he instructed. "You will not return to service today." She bowed, unsure how to respond. As she left the chamber, the Alpha King stood alone, disturbed by what he had witnessed and by the unease that lingered long after the door had closed. The darkness that had been hidden was no longer contained, and nothing within the palace would remain untouched by its exposure. Chapter 6. The encounter did not end when Arana left the chamber. Long after the healers had tended to her injuries and dusk settled over the palace, a quiet unease lingered, one that neither distance nor duty could dispel. The Alpha King found himself restless. He moved through the palace with an unfamiliar distraction, his thoughts returning again and again to the servant who had stood before him in silence. It was not only the injustice that troubled him. He had witnessed cruelty before, corrected it before. This was different. There had been a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when he had stepped closer to her. In that instant, something within him had stirred. He had dismissed it at first, fatigue perhaps, anger sharpened by shock. Yet as the hours passed, the sensation returned, persistent and unsettling. A pull he could not explain, a quiet awareness that refused to fade. Elsewhere in the palace, Arana lay awake. The healer's chamber was calm, filled with the muted sounds of night. Her body ached,
But it was not pain that kept her from rest. Her thoughts circled the encounter in fragments. The king's voice, firm but not cruel, the way his presence had filled the room without effort. When he had stood near her, something had shifted. It had not been fear, nor relief. It was as though a deep stillness within her had been disturbed, awakened by proximity alone. Her chest had tightened, her breath catching briefly, as if responding to something she could neither name nor see. She pressed a hand lightly against herself, confused by the sensation. Arana had always been quiet within, her emotions measured and contained. This was different. This was unfamiliar. Unseen to her, something ancient had stirred. The white wolf, long dormant, undemanding, had lifted its head, not in command or declaration, but in recognition. There was no transformation, no burst of power, only a subtle awakening, like a presence shifting from sleep to awareness. The bond did not announce itself. It did not claim or demand. It simply existed. The Alpha King felt it again later that night, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the palace grounds. The moon was high, its light soft and unassuming. He had stood beneath it countless times before, yet never with this sense of alignment, this quiet tension beneath his skin. He placed a hand over his chest, unsettled. "What is this?" he murmured to no one. There was no answer. Neither of them understood what had begun. There were no visions, no revelations, no words spoken by gods or spirits, only a subtle awareness, shared, unspoken, and unresolved, a connection forming without permission or explanation. By morning, both would return to their roles, convinced that silence and discipline would restore order. Yet something had already shifted, delicate but irreversible. The bond had awakened, and though neither the Alpha King nor Arana could yet name it, the quiet pull between them had begun to weave itself into the fabric of the kingdom, patient, restrained, and waiting to be understood.
Chapter 7. The days that followed brought no peace to the Alpha King. Outwardly, he fulfilled his duties with the same precision he always had. Councils were held, petitions heard, matters of trade and defense addressed without delay. His voice remained steady, his authority remained intact. Yet beneath that composure, restlessness took hold. It came in quiet moments, when the council chamber emptied, when the palace settled into evening, when the noise of responsibility faded. His thoughts drifted where he did not intend them to go. He found himself pausing in corridors he had no reason to enter, glancing toward the healer's quarters without conscious decision. The pull returned each time, subtle but undeniable. He tried to reason with it. The mind seeks patterns, explanations. Perhaps it was the shock of witnessing cruelty so close to his throne. Perhaps guilt for not having seen it sooner. Perhaps exhaustion from years of unbroken rule. None of these explanations satisfied him. The feeling was not agitation alone. It carried with it a strange clarity, a sense of alignment that unsettled him more than discomfort ever could. It was as though something within him had been stirred awake, now refusing to be ignored. At night, sleep came fitfully. When it did, it brought no answers, only impressions he could not fully recall upon waking, a presence, a stillness, a quiet certainty that lingered without form. He rose before dawn more than once, standing beneath the open sky, searching the moon for meaning. It offered none. What troubled him most was the restraint of it all. If this were desire, he could dismiss it. If it were ambition, he could master it. But this was neither. It did not urge him forward nor push him away. It simply remained, patient and persistent. He was Alpha King. He had been trained to confront threats directly, to act decisively. This uncertainty was foreign territory. Eventually, he accepted what instinct had already told him. This was not something to face alone. There was only one person within the kingdom who might understand such unrest without judgment: the High Priestess, keeper of tradition, interpreter of the old ways, bound more to the moon goddess than to any throne. He summoned her quietly, without announcement. When she arrived, she studied him longer than protocol required. Her gaze was calm, but knowing. "You are troubled," she said at last. He did not deny it. "There is a disturbance within me, one I cannot name." The priestess inclined her head slightly, as though she had expected no less. "Then it is time you listened to it." He hesitated. "I do not act on what I do not understand." "Then you have already taken the first step," she replied. Silence followed, heavy but not uncomfortable. The Alpha King felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Whatever this was, it had carried him beyond the reach of denial. By seeking counsel, he had acknowledged it, and though he did not yet know what answers awaited him, he understood one thing clearly: the restlessness was not passing. It was leading him somewhere, and he would have to follow. Chapter 8. The High Priestess did not speak at once. She led the Alpha King into the inner sanctum, a place seldom entered except during moments of great consequence. The air there was still, scented faintly with incense and aged stone. Moon symbols lined the walls, worn smooth by generations of reverence. Only when the doors were sealed did she turn to face him. "You are not the first Alpha to feel what you are feeling," she said quietly. The words settled heavily between them. The Alpha King straightened. "Then you know what it is." "I know what it leads to," she replied. She crossed the chamber slowly and reached for a sealed scroll kept apart from the others. Its markings were old, its edges softened by time rather than use. "This was entrusted to my order long before your reign," the priestess continued. "It was not hidden out of deception, but out of necessity." She unrolled the scroll part way, revealing symbols written in a careful, deliberate hand. "There is a prophecy bound to the Alpha line, one that speaks not of conquest or war, but of balance." The Alpha King listened without interruption. "The prophecy foretells the coming of a fated mate," she said, her voice steady. "A union not chosen by court or council, but recognized by the moon goddess herself." She paused, allowing the words to settle. "The sign of her is the white wolf, rare, quiet, often unnoticed, and upon her body a birthmark, faint, easily dismissed, yet unmistakable to those who know what to seek." The Alpha King felt a tightening in his chest. "You have seen it," the priestess said gently. It was not a question. He did not answer. He did not need to. When the Alpha stands before her, the bond awakens without command. There is no spectacle, no announcement, only recognition. She rolled the scroll a little further. "The prophecy speaks also of consequence," she said, her voice steady. "When the fated mate is taken as Luna, the noon goddess is pleased, the land is blessed, the kingdom is shielded from unseen harm, fertility increases, of fields, of families, of hope." The Alpha King's voice was low. "And if the bond is denied?" The priestess met his gaze. "The prophecy does not threaten," she said. "It simply states what is lost." Silence filled the chamber. "There is more," she said at last. "The bond is divine. It stands above all others. When it is fulfilled, it overrides existing unions, spiritually and by ancient law. The weight of that truth pressed heavily upon him. "You did not tell me," he said, not in anger but in disbelief. "You were not meant to know until the bond stirred," the priestess replied. "To know too early is to interfere." He turned away, the implications unfolding in his mind, his throne, his marriage, the stability of the kingdom, and through it all the image of a quiet servant who had never once asked for more than survival. "She does not know," he said. "No," the priestess agreed, "and she must not be burdened with this knowledge until you are ready to face it." The Alpha King exhaled slowly. "What you choose next will shape more than your own life." He understood that. The prophecy was no longer a distant relic guarded by silence. It had found its moment, and in doing so, it had placed the future of the kingdom in his hands. "We shall discuss further on this at the council chamber," the Alpha King said lastly.
Chapter 9. The palace chamber had not been this full in years. Stone pillars stood in silent rows as nobles, council elders, high-ranking warriors, and royal advisors filled the hall. Their voices were low, uneasy, layered with speculation. At the far end sat the Alpha King, upon the raised seat, not relaxed, not ceremonial, but rigid, as though the throne itself weighed heavier than usual. Beside one of the pillars stood Arana. She had not been summoned forward. No title had been spoken over her. She remained where she was placed, visible yet unannounced, hands folded, eyes lowered, calm in a way that unsettled those who noticed her. Across the chamber stood Luna Queen Bestabel, still crowned, still robed in authority, still every inch a queen. The Alpha King rose. "This assembly has been called," he began, his voice steady but stripped of warmth, "to address a matter that concerns the throne, the law of our land, and the will of the moon goddess." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Before he could continue, Bestabel stepped forward. "This assembly is unlawful," she said, sharply, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "You convene without my consent to judge a queen based on whispers and superstition?" Silence followed, tense, expectant. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the elders. "Have I failed this kingdom? Have the borders weakened under my reign? Have our people gone hungry? Have enemies dared cross our lands?" No one answered. She let the silence work for her. Then she turned. Her eyes landed on Arana. "And this," she said, her lips tightening, "a proof brought against me?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "A servant, a girl with no lineage, no family name, no record of birth, raised in secrecy by healers who answered to no crown." Arana did not move. "She cannot even defend herself," Bestabel continued, voice rising, "and yet you would tear down a crowned Luna for her?" Several elders shifted in their seats. Bestabel felt it and pressed harder. "You speak of prophecy," she said, pacing slowly, "but who guards it? Who interprets it? A single priestess who answers only to the moon goddess and no law of this realm?" Her gaze snapped toward the entrance. "Bring her in," she demanded. The priestess entered moments later, staff in hand, expression unreadable. Bestabel faced her fully now. "Tell me, priestess," she challenged, "where in our laws does prophecy outrank the throne?" The priestess's voice when it came was calm and unwavering. "Divine law precedes all earthly law." A scoff echoed through the chamber. "Convenient and dangerous," she shot back.
She turned to the Alpha King, her voice shifting, no longer sharp but wounded. "You would discard me for a bond you do not understand? You would shame your daughters, destabilize this kingdom for a destiny wrapped in riddles?" The Alpha King said nothing. That silence enraged her more than words ever could. "You sit there, ready to let strangers rewrite the laws we upheld together, ready to erase years of loyalty, sacrifice, and rule." She gestured toward the elders. "And will you let this stand? Today it is prophecy, tomorrow it will be chaos." The chamber was no longer murmuring, it was holding its breath. The priestess spoke again, not louder, but stronger. "The signs have awakened. The bond has revealed itself. The prophecy was never meant to be convenient, only true." Bestabel laughed, sharp and hollow. "Then let truth tear this kingdom apart." Her eyes burned as she glanced once more at Arana, still silent, still unmoving. "This is not over," Bestabel said coldly. "Not today, not like this." The Alpha King finally rose fully from the throne. "This assembly is adjourned," he declared. No verdict, no crown removed, no judgment spoken. The council dispersed slowly, tension clinging to the chamber like smoke after fire. Arana remained where she was until the hall emptied. Above them all, the moon watched, unchanged, patient, waiting. And the reckoning, once summoned, refused to be dismissed. Chapter 10. The decision of the council was delivered with restraint. Luna Queen Bestabel was not dragged from her chambers. No crowd gathered to witness her fall. The crown was not torn from her head, nor was her name spoken with insult. Instead, the decree was read in quiet formality, witnessed by elders and sealed by the Alpha King himself. By divine law and acknowledged tradition, her reign as Luna Queen had ended. She remained within the palace, for now. Days later, the kingdom gathered beneath an open sky. Banners were raised, drums echoed softly across stone and street. Warriors lined the courtyard in full regalia, while nobles and commoners stood side by side, drawn by a sense that something larger than ceremony was unfolding. At the center stood Alpha King Trova. Beside him stood Arana. She wore no excess, no heavy jewels weighed her down. Her presence alone seemed enough. When the priestess stepped forward and lifted her staff, the crowd fell silent, not from command, but instinct. By the will of the moon goddess and the law of the land, Arana was presented as Luna Queen. The moment the crown touched her head, a hush spread across the gathering. The air shifted, subtle, unmistakable. A warmth rolled through the courtyard, as though the land itself had exhaled. The people bowed. Bestabel watched from a distance, not hidden, not removed, present enough to see it all. When Arana turned, her eyes met Bestabel's. The old queen expected judgment, perhaps retaliation, perhaps the quiet satisfaction of power returned. Instead, Arana lowered her head. "No harm will come to you by my command," she said, her voice carrying without force. "What was done belongs to the past. I choose mercy." The words landed heavier than any sentence. Bestabel said nothing. From that day, the palace changed hands, but not its cruelty. Arana ruled with restraint, and the kingdom responded in kind. Whispers of blessing moved through the land. Crops thickened, borders held. And still, Bestabel remained. Each morning she woke beneath a roof that was no longer hers. Each night she heard the palace move in rhythms that no longer answered to her name. Each passing day, she watched a girl she once ordered into silence now sit upon the throne. It became unbearable. One night, without escort or announcement, Bestabel left the palace. The forest received her as it had always waited to, patient, dark, unjudging. Beneath the canopy, she stopped and turned back. moonlight carving sharp lines across her face. The queen was gone. What remained looked back with eyes too fierce to soften. If the moon goddess chose her, then I shall become the curse that breaks her. The trees swallowed her words, and far behind her the kingdom slept, crowned with light, unaware that forgiveness had not ended the story, only delayed the reckoning.
Thank you for staying with us till the very end. Would you like to see book 2 of this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly means a lot to us.